The CEO stood in the empty lobby, his suit still crisp, his face pale, and his voice barely a whisper. "If you play Chopin, I'll marry you," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The janitor didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He simply looked at the man with a quiet calm that felt like a challenge. The CEO's words hung in the air, ridiculous and desperate, and for a moment, the whole building seemed to hold its breath. Everyone watching wondered what would happen next, and no one could have guessed how the janitor's response would change everything. Before we dive in, if you love stories that restore your faith in people, please subscribe to Kindness Tales, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this one. This all happened in a city that felt like a million other cities, with glass towers, coffee shops, and traffic that never really stopped. The CEO, named Daniel, ran a fast-growing tech company. He had everything you could imagine: money, influence, a sleek apartment, and a calendar that was always full. But he didn't have something he desperately wanted, something that had been missing for a long time. He didn't have a sense of being loved for who he was, not for what he did. The janitor, named Luis, worked in the same building. He wasn't just a guy who cleaned floors. He was the person who knew every corner of the place. The one who noticed when someone was having a rough day. The one who quietly made the world a little cleaner and a little kinder. He arrived before dawn and stayed long after everyone left, moving through the empty halls like he owned the silence. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Daniel had been watching him for months without realizing it. Not in a creepy way, more like noticing a calm presence in a chaotic world. Luis never rushed. He never complained. He always greeted people with a smile that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than a simple "Good morning." Daniel was used to people who wanted something from him. Luis wanted nothing. That was what made him so different. It started with small moments. Daniel would pass Luis in the hallway, and Luis would nod, not like he was bowing, but like he was acknowledging another human being. One day Daniel saw Luis stop to help a young woman who had dropped her groceries on the sidewalk outside the building. Luis didn't rush. He just knelt down, picked up the bags, and handed them back with a soft, "You're okay." The woman thanked him, and Luis walked away without expecting a reward. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like watching a person who lived in a different world, a world where kindness wasn't a transaction. Daniel began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: guilt. Not because he was a bad person, but because he realized he had been living a life where the only thing that mattered was success. He didn't know how to feel the way Luis seemed to feel. One evening, Daniel stayed late. He had a major presentation the next day, and he was anxious. His hands shook slightly as he typed, and the weight of expectations pressed down on him like a heavy coat. He was so focused that he didn't notice Luis working quietly in the corner, mopping the floor in slow, steady strokes. When Daniel finally stood up to stretch, he noticed the janitor's small radio playing softly. It wasn't music Daniel recognized, just something calm and beautiful. Luis looked up and smiled. "Long day?" he asked. Daniel almost laughed at the simplicity of it. "You could say that," he replied. "You always work so late." Luis shrugged. "It's quiet. I like the quiet." Daniel nodded, then paused. Something about the way Luis said it made Daniel think of his own life. His quiet was never quiet. It was always full of noise, full of emails and calls and the constant pressure to do more. He took a deep breath. "You ever get tired of it?" he asked, surprising himself. Luis looked at him like he was thinking. "Tired of what?" Daniel hesitated. "Of everything. The job, the life, the constant push. Do you ever feel like you're just surviving?" Luis didn't answer right away. He finished wiping the floor, then set the mop aside and walked over to the wall where a small piano sat in a corner. It was old and out of place, like a forgotten memory. Daniel had seen it before, but never paid much attention. Luis ran his fingers over the keys, not playing, just feeling them. The sound was quiet and slightly out of tune, but it still carried something. Daniel felt a strange pull in his chest, like a memory of something he couldn't name. "What's that?" Daniel asked. Luis smiled softly. "My mother's piano. She used to play when I was a kid. I keep it here because it reminds me of home. Daniel stared at the instrument. He hadn't expected a janitor to have something like that. It didn't fit with the image he had of Luis, but that was the point, wasn't it? People don't fit into the boxes we build for them. Daniel took a step closer. Can you play? Luis shrugged again, almost shy. A little. Daniel's heart started to beat faster. He didn't know why, but something about the idea of this man playing music in the empty lobby felt like a secret. He could almost see the whole story unfolding in his mind, like a movie he didn't know he was watching. Play something, Daniel said, suddenly feeling bold. Play Chopin. Luis blinked. He looked at Daniel like he wasn't sure he heard correctly. Chopin? Daniel nodded. Yes, Chopin. No one here would hear it. Just play. Luis hesitated, then sat down. His fingers trembled for a moment as he placed them on the keys. Daniel could feel the tension in the air. It was like watching someone about to do something that mattered. The first notes came out shaky, like a child learning to walk. But then slowly the music found its way. The melody grew, and the lobby filled with a sound so beautiful it made Daniel's eyes sting. It wasn't perfect. The piano was old, and the room wasn't built for music. But the emotion in the notes was real. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He just listened, and something inside him shifted. He felt like he was hearing a part of himself he had forgotten. The music carried him back to a time when life was simpler, when he had dreams that didn't involve spreadsheets and quarterly reports. When the song ended, Daniel didn't know what to say. He was shaking, not from fear, but from something else. He looked at Luis and felt a strange sense of admiration. Here was a man who had nothing, and yet he could create something so rich. Daniel walked closer. That was incredible, he said. You have a gift. Luis shrugged again, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. It's just music. Daniel shook his head. No, it's more than that. Then Daniel did something he would later describe as impulsive. He leaned against the piano, looked at Luis, and said, "If you play Chopin, I'll marry you." It came out as a joke, a ridiculous thing to say in the middle of an empty lobby at midnight. But the words landed like a stone in water. They rippled. Luis froze, his hands still hovering over the keys. Daniel immediately regretted it. He realized how strange it sounded, how it could be misunderstood. He tried to laugh it off. I mean, not literally, I don't know. I'm tired, I'm trying to feel something real. Luis looked at him with a calm expression that didn't change. He didn't laugh. He didn't get angry. He simply said, "If you want something real, you have to be honest about what you want." Daniel felt his face flush. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected the janitor to look him in the eye and speak like that. "I'm honest," Daniel said too quickly. I'm overwhelmed." Luis nodded slowly. Overwhelmed is not the same as honest. Daniel stared at him. "What do you mean?" Luis sighed, like he was tired of explaining things to people who didn't want to listen. "You're looking for something to fill the emptiness you feel. You think a big decision or a dramatic moment will fix it. But it won't. You have to decide what you really want and then go after it." Daniel swallowed. He felt exposed, like Luis had seen straight through him. He didn't know why he was telling a stranger his deepest fears, but he did. He told Luis about his childhood, about how his father had pushed him to be successful, about how he had built his life around the idea of proving something. He told him about the loneliness that came with being at the top, about the nights he couldn't sleep, about the feeling that he was always performing. Luis listened. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there letting Daniel speak. And when Daniel finally finished, he looked at him and said, "You don't need to marry someone to feel loved. You need to love yourself enough to stop chasing what doesn't matter." Daniel laughed, but it was a shaky laugh. "That's easy for you to say." Luis shook his head. "No, it's not easy. But it's simple, and simple is where truth lives." The next day, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what Luis had said. He went through his presentation, but his mind kept drifting back to the old piano and the janitor's calm eyes. He felt like he was standing at a crossroads. Then later that week, something happened that changed everything. Daniel's company was hosting a charity event, and he had arranged for a big donation to a local school. The event was in the building's lobby, with lights, speeches, and a crowd of important people. Daniel was in his element, smiling for cameras, shaking hands, making sure everything looked perfect. As the event went on, Daniel noticed a small commotion near the back. A woman was crying softly, and a few people were trying to comfort her. Daniel didn't recognize her, but something about her sadness pulled at him. He walked over and asked what was wrong. The woman looked up, her eyes red. "My son, he's sick," she said. "The school, they said they can't afford his treatment. I don't know what to do." Daniel felt a familiar surge of panic. He wanted to fix it, but he didn't know how. He was a CEO. He was used to solving problems with money and resources. But this felt different. This was a person's life. He looked around, and then he saw Luis standing nearby, quietly watching. Luis had a calm expression, like he knew something Daniel didn't. Daniel approached him and asked, "Do you know her?" Luis shook his head. "No, but I know what it feels like to be helpless." Daniel nodded. He felt a sudden, fierce determination. He turned back to the woman and said, "We can help. I'll make sure the company covers the treatment." The woman stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, we'll cover it." The woman started crying harder, but this time it was different. It was relief. It was gratitude. It was hope. Later, after the event, Daniel found Luis by the piano again. He felt like he needed to say something, to thank him for opening his eyes. "I didn't expect you to respond the way you did," Daniel said. "When I said that thing, and it's something I've been avoiding." Luis nodded. "Kindness is a muscle. You have to use it." Daniel looked at him, and for the first time, he saw Luis not as a janitor, but as a person with a story, with dreams, with a heart. He realized that the world had taught him to value only certain kinds of people, and he had been living in that trap for so long. He asked Luis a question he had never thought he would ask. "Why do you do it? Why do you keep being kind, even when no one notices?" Luis looked at him, and his voice was quiet but firm. "Because someone was kind to me when I was young. I was lost, and someone gave me a chance. It didn't cost them much, but it changed my life." Daniel felt tears well up. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded, and the silence between them felt like something sacred. From that day on, Daniel's life changed. He started showing up in ways he never had before. He made time for people, not just for meetings. He began volunteering, and he started listening to the people who worked for him, instead of just expecting results. He still ran a company, but he ran it with a different heart. And Luis, he continued to work quietly, still arriving before dawn, still keeping the building clean, still playing the old piano when the night was quiet. But he noticed something too. People began to look at him differently. They stopped seeing him as just a janitor. They saw him as a person. One day, Daniel walked into the lobby and found Luis sitting at the piano. The building was empty, and the air was still. Daniel sat down beside him and asked, "Play something." Luis smiled. "Chopin?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Chopin." Luis began to play, and the music filled the room again. But this time it wasn't just beautiful. It felt like a promise. It felt like proof that kindness can ripple out in ways we never imagine. And Daniel realized something that he had been avoiding for a long time. He didn't need a dramatic moment or a grand gesture to find meaning. He just needed to be present. He needed to be kind. If you ever feel like the world is too cold, remember that a small act of kindness can change someone's life. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. And if you have a kindness story of your own, please share it in the comments. We'd love to hear how you've been touched by someone's compassion. In the end, the most powerful thing we can do is treat each other like human beings. Because sometimes, the person you least expect to inspire you is the one who quietly reminds you what it means to be alive. And when we choose kindness, we don't just change someone else's life, we change our own.